So I'm Andrew Quinn, the Daily Record's Westminster reporter, and I'm joined today by Ian Murray, who's the Labour MP for Edinburgh South and the Shadow Scotland Secretary. So Ian, we've just had Prime Minister's questions here in the House of Commons. What did you think of it? What was your verdict?
Well, it was quite clear that the Liz Truss saga was going to dominate because it's reminding the entirety of the public that she spent £45 billion on unfunded tax cuts. It's put up everyone's mortgages, it crashed the economy, and everyone's still paying the price for that. So her book that's come out this week was always going to dominate. But the key thing from a Keir Starmer perspective was that he was then able to relate the £45 billion that crashed the economy to Rishi Sunak's current proposal, which is to scrap national insurance, which costs £46 billion, but he's refusing to say where the money will come from. So that means that Keir Starmer is able to then say to the Prime Minister, this is your policy, it costs £1 billion more than the Liz Truss policy that actually crashed the economy that everyone's still paying for. How are you paying for it? And the Prime Minister 4 times refuses to even answer the question or even engage with the question, but did re-emphasise that that was actually the policy. So I think now in the coming weeks and months, there'll be a huge number of questions about where they're paying for it. Is it coming from the health service? Is it coming from pensions, which is what national insurance pays for? What's actually happening here with this policy that's unfunded?
And so do you think Keir did quite a good job then this week's Prime Minister?
Well, I think he does, because he exposes this. I mean, the great thing about Keir's strategy at PMQs, and also him as a person and a professional in terms of being a lawyer, is he tends not to state the obvious. He tends to ask the questions and let that unwind. You'll remember the famous question that he asked Boris Johnson about the parties in Downing Street. And rather than pressing, he just said the public will make their own mind up and I'll leave it there, and sat down. And that left everyone else then digging around asking the question. So he's got a very, very good probing style that allows the Prime Minister to actually answer the questions without actually answering them. So people watching PMQs tonight on the news, they'll finish watching it and go, actually, the Prime Minister's got a £46 billion unfunded spending commitment and hasn't been able to tell anyone where the money's coming from. And so Keir's been able to get that into the eyes of the public. So I think it's very successful in that sense.
And obviously, Stephen Flynn from the SNP, he gets a slot every week, uses 2 questions this time to focus on independence, which he hasn't done for a while. We spoke about Gordon Brown and about Ros Foyer, the General Secretary of the STUC. What did you make of that?
I thought it was a bit muddled this week. It's quite clear that Stephen Flynn, as the leader of the SNP, is turning his guns on Labour because we're breathing down his neck. In fact, we're ahead in some of the opinion polls. So he's worried about a very large number of his seats falling to Labour. So he concentrates on that. But I thought his first question about Gordon Brown was very, very muddled. Gordon Brown's very much liked in Scotland. It seems a strange thing to be attacking Gordon Brown at a Conservative Prime Minister's questions. Surely it should be on the government. And then his second question about the STUC just allowed the Prime Minister then to say, you're just harping on about independence. And the key thing that I think is quite strange about that kind of questioning today from Stephen Flynn is the issue of independence and another referendum is so low down in the priorities of the Scottish people, like so low down it's barely registering. To major on that would maybe have people come to the conclusion that he's going after very much a core vote strategy. So that might tell you he's starting to write places off. Otherwise, he would take a slightly different strategy in terms of PMQs.
And Rishi Sunak brought up the hate crime bill in Scotland as well. He accused the Scottish Government of trying to lock up J.K. Rowling. What did you make of that?
Well, I'm not aware that J.K. Rowling's been locked up or that's the strategy, but there's a big problem with this Act. I think there's a debate in the Scottish Parliament this afternoon about this. It's got to be looked at in terms of how its implementation is. It's wasting a lot of police time. I think people at home will be pretty surprised to hear that you can go into a fish factory or a pawn shop in Glasgow and report hate crime. This is a complete and utter disaster. And really, just as a highlight of how bad the Scottish Government has become, in the sense that they can't even draft legislation now that works, and they can't even implement their own legislation. And I think they're falling apart. And very much like the Conservatives down here, I think they're out of time. They should take a time on the opposition benches to regroup and give somebody else a shot to run the country.
And just finally, there's been a couple of other big things going on in Westminster this week. The Rwanda bill's been going back and forth, and we had the smoking ban vote last night. What's been your take on those?
Well, in terms of the smoking ban, the vote was last night. It required Labour votes to get it through. This was Rishi Sunak's flagship policy. Your viewers will remember back in October at his party conference, he stood up there as being the man for change. He was going to ban smoking for generations. He then brings it to the House of Commons and has to give a free vote to his own side on the basis that he can't get it through. 57 rebels, including some government ministers, who wouldn't back his policy. Labour votes got it through. Shows you how weak the Prime Minister is and how really he's completely and utterly finished. The Rwanda bill comes back again. This will be the 4th time we've had amendments from the House of Lords. I believe there's some concessions being talked about Afghanis who are seeking asylum from the Taliban, who fought with the British forces in Afghanistan, could potentially go to Rwanda. It's a fairly straightforward amendment to exclude them from the scheme. The House of Lords have passed it again with a huge majority, including a huge number of Conservatives. It looks as if the government might give some concessions on that. But actually, again, there's most people on the Conservative backbenches think the Rwanda policy is a disaster, is illegal, is immoral and is costly. The Prime Minister thinks that himself, and he certainly did when he was Chancellor. This is just a gimmick. It's costly, it's a gimmick, it's not going to work. And it's not going to act as a deterrent. So it's again another government that's out of time and out of ideas and should be out of office.
Do you believe your beloved Hearts will beat Rangers this weekend?
Comfortably.
Right, perfect. Thank you.